Louisiana is an absolutely fascinating place with so much history, and with a place rich in history comes many terrible tales and local legends to go along with it. From disasters to battle and even the story of a daring pirate, these small towns have terrifying stories, so let's dive right in. Starting off our list today, we have Natchitoches. I'm so sorry, I likely said that wrong, and I'm sure that there will be some other town names that I mispronounced later on, so just let me know kindly down in the comments how you would say them. Alright, I'm here to learn. Louisiana's oldest town, Natchitoches, is known for its stunning historic district and beautiful Cane River, but it also harbors a darker past. Among the most whispered about sites is the Magnolia Plantation, where some claim to hear the clanking of chains from the days of slavery and see ghostly figures in the fields at night. Another notable location is the haunted Bullard Mansion, where the apparition of a sorrowful woman is said to wander the rooms, mourning a tragic loss from centuries ago. Along the Cane River, locals and visitors have reported unexplained lights and shadowy figures, suggesting a lingering presence of those who once lived and died in this historic town. These tales only contribute to the town's reputation as a place where the past is never entirely at rest. Next up today, we have Old Algiers. Just across the Mississippi River from the French Quarter, Old Algiers is one of the oldest parts of New Orleans and exudes a quaint yet mysterious charm. Its history of maritime disasters, battles, and yellow fever epidemics has given rise to numerous ghost stories. Legends tell of spirits from different eras wandering its locales, notably the haunted Algiers courthouse, where visitors often report eerie sensations and fleeting shadows that defy explanation. Similarly, at Algiers Point, the oldest part of the neighborhood, phantom footsteps and ghostly apparitions are not uncommon. Some believe these hauntings are the souls of those affected by the area's tumultuous events, unable to find peace, forever imprinting their presence on Old Algiers' historical canvas. Next up today, we have Gretna. Gretna is situated on the west bank of the Mississippi River, and it is a small town with a historic district that seems to hold secrets of the past. Among its most eerily enchanting sights is the Gretna Green Blacksmith Shop, an establishment steeped in folklore and whispered tales. Legend has it that the spirits of blacksmiths and patrons from bygone eras continue to inhabit this place, their presence felt through disembodied clanks of metal and fleeting shadows, and it's said that these spectral figures are not just remnants of the past, but guardians of stories untold, making this shop a focal point for those intrigued by the paranormal and the town's mysterious history. Next up today, we have St. Francisville. St. Francisville has definitely carved its niche in the realm of the paranormal with the infamous Myrtles Plantation, a place we have spoken about many times here on the channel, and it is often cited as one of America's most haunted homes. This grand estate is of course steeped in eerie legends and is said to be haunted by the spirits of former inhabitants who met tragic fates. Among the chilling tales are those of a young girl who appears in the windows, spectral voices that echo through the hallways at night, and inexplicable cold spots that move across rooms. Visitors and staff have reported encounters with apparitions and unexplained phenomena, only adding layers of intrigue and a lot of fear to the plantation's already dark history. Next up on our list today, we have Metairie, a suburb of New Orleans, and this place has its share of ghost stories, especially in the older parts of the town. The cemetery there has very elaborate tombs and statues, and of course, it is said to be haunted. The cemetery's atmosphere, particularly at dusk, lends itself to the spine-chilling tales recounted by those who visit. Some speak of seeing ghostly apparitions or spectral lights weaving through the tombs, while others report the unsettling feeling of being watched or followed. The intricate mausoleums and ornate statues, some of which commemorate prominent figures from Louisiana's history, seem to hold their own secrets, contributing to the cemetery's mysterious aura. Legends suggest that the spirits of those interred within these grand vaults are restless, perhaps disturbed by the living or clinging to their earthly ties. Such stories have cemented the cemetery's reputation as not just a final resting place, but a locale where the past and the present, the tangible and the ethereal, eerily intersect. Next up today we have Chalmette. The Chalmette Battlefield and National Cemetery. These are the hallowed grounds where the pivotal Battle of New Orleans took place, and it holds a deep historical and supernatural resonance. The spectral encounters reported here are not just limited to visual apparitions, but many visitors claim to hear the distant clash of arms, the urgent drum beats, and the anguished cries of soldiers echoing through the turmoil of the 1815 battle. These auditory hauntings are particularly potent on foggy mornings or late evenings, creating an atmosphere that feels kind of suspended in time. Not only this, but the cemetery, final resting place for many soldiers, is said to have its own eerie ambiance. People have reported sudden temperature drops and even the feeling of being watched, suggesting that the spirits of those who fought and fell are still tethered to this place of memory and loss, especially around the anniversary of the battle. Next up today we have Jean Lafitte. Is it Jean or Jean? Let me know. This small town, named after the infamous pirate, is steeped in legends and lore, with many believing that Jean Lafitte's spirit still lingers. Locals and visitors whisper about ghostly pirates wandering the marshes, sometimes seen from the corner of the eye, vanishing when approached. The lore suggests that these ghosts are protectors of hidden treasures, still guarding their loot even in death. The dense fog that often blankets the area adds a kind of visual mystique, giving the town an almost ethereal quality at night. Amid this fog, mysterious lights are sometimes seen moving through the trees, described by some as the lanterns of Jean Lafitte's crew, searching for something lost, or perhaps signaling to lost souls. Next up today we have Thibodaux. With deep roots in the sugarcane industry, this town not only bears the scars of its tumultuous past, but also carries the weight of its ghostly legacies. The Thibodaux Massacre, an event of racial violence, is a very dark chapter in the town's history, and it is believed to have left an indelible mark on the area, with many claiming that the unrested souls of the victims still roam the town. The air seems thick with the echoes of the past, particularly at night when the boundaries between eras blur. Visitors and residents report chilling encounters with apparitions in period clothing, inexplicable sounds, and a pervasive sense of unease in certain areas. These phantoms are most often sighted near historic sites tied to the massacre, as well as along the shadowy banks of the bayous where the water whispers of old sorrows. Such tales only contribute to Thibodaux's reputation as a place where history lives on, not just in books and memories, but palpably in the very atmosphere. Moving on down today we have Frenier. Nestled near the mysterious waters of Lake Pontchartrain, this place carries a haunting legacy amplified by its tragic history of natural disasters and eerie local folklore. The town's past is marred by catastrophic hurricanes that have decimated the community, leading to tales of lost souls and restless spirits that linger in this devastated landscape. Only adding to its mystique, Frenier is shrouded in tales of voodoo practices and curses, believed by some to be intertwined with the town's misfortunes. The desolate ghost town ambiance is palpable, with abandoned structures and overgrown vegetation reinforcing this sense of abandonment and otherworldliness. Visitors and lovers of the paranormal are drawn to Frenier's secluded setting, where the whispering winds and lapping waters seem to echo with the troubled past and spectral residents. And finally on our list today we have Mandeville. Across Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans, Mandeville has its own tales of the paranormal. Among the most talked about ghostly legends is the tale of the Mandeville lakefront, where apparitions are said to wander the shores, especially on foggy nights, which seems to be a bit of a theme among these Louisiana places. Some locals recount seeing figures that suddenly vanish, leaving only footprints in the sand or the sound of disembodied whispers behind them. In the heart of Mandeville, historic buildings stand, and it's within these structures that many of the town's paranormal stories find their roots. For instance, there are accounts of spectral figures seen gazing out of windows only to disappear when approached. Others have reported unexplained sounds like footsteps or muted conversations echoing through empty rooms or hallways. These occurrences have fueled a sense of intrigue and mystery, making Mandeville a place where the past seems to intersect with the present in the most eerie of ways.
Shepherdstown, West Virginia, is arguably one of the most haunted places in America, according to those who have visited the town and experienced its dark paranormal atmosphere. The town was actually formed long before America became a country. Well, 46 years at least, and it was originally named Mecklenburg, but that changed when Thomas Shepard obtained the land in 1734. It's considered a historic Civil War area, as just 3 miles up from the town, the Antietam Battle, the most gruesome battle of the Civil War, was fought. A hotel in the town is also home to some pretty dark deaths. In one instance, a man took his own life after losing a card game. In another, a young man was killed for winning. Both men are said to roam around the hotel, and many claim to hear the younger of the two crying out for his mother, as he did during his last living moments. But perhaps the most famous sighting in the town is that of a dark, shadowy figure that lurks in the clock tower after dark. Oh, and the bakery is also haunted, with almost anyone who enters it claiming to have felt the sensation of hands pushing up against them and hearing whispered conversations in the waiting area despite being completely alone.
Next on the list we have Dingus in Mingo County. Love that name, Dingus. This is a very small and remote community. There are under 2,000 residents, and one of the things that makes this place really interesting is that one of the only ways to access the town is through a mile-long, very narrow, one-lane tunnel, which can be aggravating at the best of times, I imagine, and very dangerous at the worst. But Dingus also has a pretty dark history. It was a railroad and mining town at one time, and it was one of the most lawless places in the state. Lawmen struggled to keep order, and shootouts between police and outlaws was pretty common. And one thing the residents did not take kindly to were outsiders, and a lot of this was racially motivated. It wasn't uncommon for immigrants to be met with armed townspeople at the other end of the tunnel who would use very aggressive methods to keep them away. A lot of dark things happened at Dingus Tunnel, not just from violence like this, but accidents as well, like train collisions. So, aside from all the dark history, it probably comes as no surprise that many locals claim the tunnel to be quite haunted.
Next up, we have the Weston Asylum. You know we had to have at least one asylum on our list. It's classic. Back in the mid-1800s, the town of Weston was home to the controversially named Transileni Lunatic Asylum. It was used to house and treat the mentally ill of the time. However, that pretty much meant anyone whose opinion opposed those in positions of authority, or women who sometimes cried. But I digress. While the exact number of deaths that occurred on the grounds remains unknown, local historian and state hospital expert Titus Swan has estimated the number to be in or above a 5-figure range, meaning that at least 10,000 people died in the hospital. So, like, no wonder this place is super haunted. I mean, I think we know what kind of torment went on in those places back in the day. Not only that, but this particular asylum was often overcrowded, meaning that even without what would today be considered gross misconduct, the living conditions were already pretty bleak. Today, those who enter the once abandoned building that has since been reopened to the public as a historic landmark have reported feeling a sense of extreme dread, seeing mysterious, shadowy figures roaming the halls, and hearing the disembodied, helpless screams of patients past.
Next up we have Sheep Squatch of Boone County. I'm kind of cheating here with this one, adding a whole county to the list. But the creature has been spotted all throughout the place, so I kind of had to. The Sheep Squatch, also sometimes referred to as the White Thing, is described as a large, woolly, furred monster with goat horns and razor-sharp teeth. Sightings of the creature started being reported in Boone throughout the 90s, beginning in '94, when 2 youngsters spotted the strange creature while playing in their yard. Now, what I find interesting about these reports is that the creature is always described as having white fur. Now, why do I find this interesting? Well, with Bigfoot sightings, there's usually a chance people could be misidentifying a bear, whereas here, like, what animal is there the size of a bear with white fur? Polar bears, but they're not really roaming around West Virginia. The creature was spotted again in 1995 by a couple driving down a road in Boone County. They spotted a large white-furred animal sitting in a ditch. They didn't know what it was, so they stopped to look. Then it raced towards them. They sped out of there, but found large scratch marks on their car once they made it back home.
If you're gonna do an asylum, you might as well do a prison, specifically the West Virginia Penitentiary located in the small town of Moundsville. The prison opened its doors in 1863 after West Virginia split from just Virginia, becoming its own state. During its 119-year operation, some pretty dark stuff went on inside of its walls, which earned the prison a spot on the United States Department of Justice's top 10 most violent correctional facilities list. The recreational area of the prison, located in the basement, often saw various forms of illegal activity, including assault, violation assault, substance abuse, and even killings. At any given time during the penitentiary's operation, between 600 and 700 inmates were held on the grounds, but even still the prison was highly overcrowded, with inmates often having to sleep on the floor. And over the years, the property saw almost 1,000 deaths. Many people believe that those who died within the prison never actually left. In fact, many visitors to the grounds have seen and even photographed the shadowy figure of a man that roams the halls. And the staff working on the premises of what is now a historical site have reported being accosted while on the job. Oh, and remember the basement? Many people have claimed to have heard screams coming from its depths, but most are far too scared to go down and check it out.
In the town of Princeton sits the Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. Unless you live in Princeton, West Virginia, or are a paranormal enthusiast though, you've probably never heard of the place. It's not much of a tourist destination anymore because it's been abandoned since 1988. It's said that the park was built on cursed land, and that's not just because people have seen specters lingering around the park, it's because there were tragic deaths at the park, and the place was built on land with some pretty dark history. There was a massacre on this land back in 1785. The landowner, Mitchell Clay, had lost 2 of his sons to a Native American raiding party and sought revenge. He gathered up a bunch of locals and attacked them right back. Then, in 1926, a man named Conley Trigg Snidow Sr. decided the land would be a perfect spot for a theme park. Over the years, there were 2 drownings in the pool. The park was also closed for a time after a failed health inspection. Then a former employee of the park bought the land in 1988, but was forced to close it down again just a year later because of increased insurance rates. So not the best luck for this place. And now the old structures like the Ferris wheel and swing ride stand eerily unused, coated in rust and haunted by ghosts. So they say.
This next one is pretty sad, but also pretty remarkable. In 1897 in Greenbrier County, and I can do a county because James did a county, so if we go down together. Anyways, in 1897 in Greenbrier County, Zona Shu was found dead. A funeral was held and Zona was laid to rest, but she couldn't rest, and so Zona's spirit visited her mother and explained to her that she had not died in the way everyone assumed she had, but instead she had been killed by her husband, who had been routinely aggressive throughout their entire marriage. Upon learning this information, Zona's mother demanded that her daughter's body be dug up and re-examined. And sure enough, upon closer inspection, it became clear to the prosecutor that Zona's neck had been broken. Her husband was arrested for the crime, and the city even installed a plaque recognizing Zona's ghost's involvement in the conviction of her killer.
The town of Harper's Ferry is said to be teeming with paranormal activity. In fact, it's said to be the most haunted town in the state. Harper's Ferry played a big role in the Civil War, and a lot of both Union and Confederate soldiers died here. In September of 1862, an estimated 13,000 soldiers died at the Battle of Harper's Ferry. There were also a number of raids, one of which was led by John Brown, who's said to haunt the town to this day. Some also say that on some nights you can hear the ghostly sounds of drummers marching their way down High Street. And there's also the tale of Screaming Jenny. So Jenny had no family, no home. She lived in an abandoned storage shed by the Harper's Ferry Railroad. One fall night, Jenny sat huddled by a fire, and then a spark leapt up from the fire landing on her clothes, which began to catch fire. She was too cold and weak to notice before it was too late. She started screaming and rushed down the train tracks for help. Now here's the thing, when you're on fire, your vision is kind of blocked by light already, so she did not see the two glowing lights of a train rushing right towards her, and she was flattened by the train. Ever since this incident, on particularly cold autumn nights, some say they can hear the sounds of screams coming from the train tracks. Conductors have even seen a glowing figure flailing in the night, only to vanish into thin air once the train gets up too close.
Next up, we have the Parkersburg North Bend Rail Trail. I'm not sure if that's a tongue twister or the title of an adult movie. But anyways, in the daytime the trail is quite lovely and pretty serene, a great place to go for picnics and lunch dates. However, I suppose if your lunch date is at a park, it's already a picnic. Anyways, you could also go for breakfast, but I wouldn't recommend you go at night. Why? Because it's haunted. Well, part of it is at least. Specifically, the 1,300 foot long tunnel that can be found along the trail, aka tunnel number 19. It is said that a woman wearing a white dress walks mournfully around inside of its dark walls. The legend goes that she was a bride riding on a train with her groom when she was pushed off and died beside the tracks. People in the area have also reported having found human bones in abandoned houses nearby, but that's an entirely different mystery for another day.
And finally, we have the town of Grafton, which is famous for one of the strangest cryptids in the United States, the Grafton Monster, which was first spotted in 1964 by a reporter named Robert Cockrell. He described the creature as this large 7 to 9 foot tall beast with white skin and no visible head. He was driving home from work late at night when he spotted the creature in the middle of the road. They raced home, then gathered 2 of his friends to come back to the site to investigate. The creature was gone, but they claimed to have come across large footprints, and they also heard a strange, low, bellowing whistle sound in the distance. The next day, dozens of calls started coming into the local newspaper, with people reporting to have spotted a similar looking creature, and that's when Cockrell decided to write his article. Reports that the cryptid started dying out by the end of that summer in 1964, but there's still sporadic sightings here and there. We're starting off the list with the Forbidden City. So this huge palace complex is often said to be a must-see if you're visiting Beijing, but it's also known to be one of the most haunted areas of the city, and possibly in all of China. The Forbidden City was built between 1406 and 1420. It's a massive complex that served as the imperial palace for 24 emperors across the Ming and Qing dynasties. Ordinary people were strictly forbidden from entering, but the thing was, once inside, departure was not permitted. It's a pretty spectacular looking place, but its history is pretty dark as well. The Yongle emperor who first lived there was quite the guy. He had this huge harem of ladies, but when important visitors came around, he decided that he had to get rid of them. So one night in 1421, he ordered thousands of people from his harem to be killed, and it was not subtle. The story goes that it was about as brutal as it gets, with people literally being torn apart. The entire palace was stained red. Lady Sui, one of his favorite women, kept a diary that talked about these killings, and when Yongle died, she and some other women were hanged. It was apparently Yongle's dying wish. The place is believed to be haunted and cursed. Emperor Yongle's own son, Hongxi, wanted to move the court somewhere else, but he suddenly died less than a year later. And visitors now say there's a dark, lingering energy in the Forbidden City. Some will say they have this overwhelming feeling of sadness or uneasiness, and people have said to see ghosts, like the White Lady, for example, a tormented spirit constantly on the run from a ghostly soldier attempting to kill her. Some say they've also heard the eerie sounds of phantom screams and swords clashing in the night. Next on the list, we have Fangdu Ghost City, which sits along the Yangtze River. This place has a chilling history that spans over 2 millennia. So legend has it that during the Eastern Han Dynasty, 2 imperial officials, Ying Shansheng and Wang Fanping, were seeking immortality through Taoist practices on top of the nearby Ming Mountain. Their combined names ominously translated to the King of Hell, as they allegedly dragged unsuspecting villagers into the underworld. Now today the area is said to have a bit of an eerie atmosphere. It's full of temples and shrines devoted to the afterlife. Paintings and sculptures in the temples depict scenes of souls undergoing torment for their earthly sins. But the place looks absolutely spectacular from images I've seen online anyway. I mean, just look at this. Looks like something straight out of a fantasy movie. We just don't have anything like this over here in Canada or the US. Yeah, definitely adding this to my bucket list. Next, we have the Cho Mansion in Shanghai. Now, you can't really call Shanghai a small town, I know, but I couldn't help it. I had to talk about this place. Talking about your standard hauntings all the time gets a little too samey, but this old abandoned mansion is said to be haunted by the spirits of exotic animals. And they don't play around like human ghosts do. These animal ghosts have been known to attack. During World War I, the price of dye skyrocketed, and two migrant brothers, having just moved to Shanghai in hopes of starting a better life, ended up striking it rich when they happened across a large warehouse full of paint cans. They became overnight millionaires, and with their newfound wealth, they constructed 2 mansions in the heart of Shanghai. They also purchased a number of animals: tigers, peacocks, crocodiles, and for a while the brothers were living it big, but at some point they just vanished. Some say they were eaten by one of their pets, but nobody knows for sure. Their mansions fell into disrepair and their animals were sold off or eaten. One of the mansions ended up being demolished, the other was moved in the 2000s, and it was at this time that stories started coming out about construction workers rushing into the nearby hospital with bite marks, claiming to have been bitten by wild animals. They had very real bite marks, but no animals were ever found on the grounds. Very spooky. Next up is Dead Fangmen Village. The Dead Fangmen Village in the outskirts of Chinyang City has a very ominous reputation. It's often dubbed as a ghost village. For starters, because nobody lives there anymore, but that's not the only reason. The ghost village is surrounded by majestic mountains with a tranquil river flowing nearby. What's left of the village are the remnants of 39 buildings with over 200 rooms, built in the architectural styles of China's Ming and Qing dynasties. It sounds pretty picturesque, but there are some pretty creepy stories about this area. First, there's the tale of the wooden armchair. Right in the middle of the village sits a small wooden chair, and legend has it that anyone who takes a seat on it meets a mysterious and untimely death. Then there's the story of a hiker who would often camp along the nearby river, and this story is really kind of creepy. One night he decided he'd play a little, harmless prank on his friends. He ventured towards the village and called out his friends' names into the darkness, trying to freak them out. But he didn't expect to hear what he heard next. It was an unfamiliar voice, but not only did he not recognize the voice, it also just didn't sound human. Not quite, anyway. And it was too close. And the worst part was the gloomy voice was calling out his name. China is home to one of the 5 famous death valleys of the world, the Gate of Hell and the Kunlun Mountains. Legend has it that anyone who ventures into the Death Valley never makes it out alive, and it's easy to see how that legend got started. The area really is dangerous. It's full of wildlife, some of it not too friendly to humans. The terrain is rugged and vast, and there's evidence of death everywhere. Tons of animal carcasses and bones litter the ground. There are also things that have been left behind by people who never made it out alive. It does look to have a desolate, hellish vibe about it. So why all this death surrounding the valley? Well, scientists checked it out and found something pretty strange. The valley has abnormally high levels of magnetism, and you know what that means? Lightning strikes. Lots of them. Alright, you want to talk about some spooky looking places? Look no further than the abandoned Fushan tunnels in Qingdao. These things look right out of a nightmare. So these tunnels were once used by German colonists who arrived in 1898. During World War II, though, they were repurposed by the Japanese as underground fortifications and storage facilities. And today, the Fushan tunnels are still there, shadowy labyrinths beneath the earth. They look like bunkers built for the apocalypse, oppressive, dark, and isolating. It's said to be incredibly eerie exploring these tunnels. The air is cold and clammy, the walls are damp, and obviously it's dark. It's the perfect atmosphere for a ghost story. It's easy to imagine the ghosts of soldiers peeking out from the shadows, and that's not even to mention the very real danger of running into very real and very living sketchy people who could be hiding in these tunnels.
The story behind this town is a 20th century tragedy that serves as a reminder of the dangers of volcanoes. It's 1985 and Colombia's Nevado del Ruiz, a seemingly peaceful snow-capped volcano, decides that it's showtime. But this isn't your average volcanic eruption with just lava and ash. Oh no, this volcano went all out. The heat from the eruption melted the mountain's glaciers, creating a monstrous lahar, a deadly cocktail of water, mud, rocks, and other debris. Basically, nature's own concrete flood. This wasn't a slow-moving disaster movie scene where you can just run to higher ground. This lahar traveled with the speed and force of a freight train. Now, imagine the town of Armero situated in a valley below this ticking time bomb. Most people were caught off guard as the magnitude of the threat wasn't fully understood or communicated. So when the lahar hit, it was like a scene from a nightmare, obliterating everything in its path and leaving little time for escape. Homes, buildings, and lives were swept away in just moments. Over 25,000 people lost their lives in what would be remembered as one of the deadliest volcanic disasters in the 20th century. This tragic event was a wake-up call on the importance of volcanic monitoring and emergency preparedness, and it just went to show the true power of nature and how crucial it is to respect and understand the warning signs that it gives us. Alright, next up on our list today we have Dhanushkodi. Nestled in the southernmost tip of India, this town was not just any town, it was a bustling port, a bridge between India and Sri Lanka, brimming with life and commerce until disaster struck. Picture the vibrant markets, the sounds of daily life, and the trains chugging away. It was a hub of activity and connection. Then came that fateful day in 1964 when nature unleashed its fury. A ferocious cyclone with winds that roared like the engines of 1,000 trains struck with merciless force. The waves, as tall as mountains, crashed onto the shores, obliterating nearly everything in its path. More than 1,700 lives were lost, families were torn apart, and the town was left in ruins, submerged under the relentless waves. Today, what remains of the town is a spectral landscape. The ruins of the railway station and the church stand eerily, monuments to the town's tragic past. Visitors to this ghost town can't help but feel a chill as they wander through the remnants. Next up on our list today we have Yokai in Peru. Once a buzzing ski resort town cradled in the arms of the breathtaking Peruvian Andes, this town had no idea what was in store for it. It was the kind of place that postcards are made of, with tourists flocking to enjoy its winter sports and local charm. But in 1970, Mother Nature had a catastrophic twist in store. A mammoth earthquake struck, its epicenter alarmingly close to the town. The quake was so powerful that it dislodged a massive section of ice and rock from Mount Huascaran, Peru's highest peak, which loomed ominously nearby. Now imagine a colossal wave of ice, rock, and debris hurtling down the mountain at speeds that defy belief, completely ruining everything in its path. This wasn't a scene from a disaster movie, it was a grim reality for Yokai. In just a few harrowing minutes, the town was buried under a thick blanket of destruction, claiming the lives of over 20,000 people in one of the deadliest avalanches in history. Today, the original site of Yokai stands as a ghostly memorial to that fateful day, largely untouched except for by time and the elements. Visitors to the area can still see the remnants poking through the earth. A new Yokai has risen a few kilometers away, striving to move forward while honoring the memory of the past. Next up on our list today, we have Dollersheim in Austria. Nestled in the picturesque landscapes of Austria, Dollersheim is a village steeped in history, with its origins tracing back to the year 1143. Imagine walking through a place where every stone and corner has a story dating back almost 9 centuries. But Dollersheim's serene beauty hides a tumultuous past. During the grip of the bad guys regime during World War II, the village's tranquility was shattered as residents were compelled to leave their homes, their familiar life turned upside down to make way for a military training ground. After World War II, the village didn't resume its former bustle and charm. It remained uninhabited, a ghost of its past self. Yet the echoes of history linger. Today, visitors to Dollersheim can explore the remnants of what once was. A church that stood witness to centuries of change, a town square that once buzzed with daily life, and a graveyard where the village's ancestors rest, perhaps still holding on to their stories. Next up on our list today, we have Kataktchan in Russia. Found in the heart of Russia's vast and frost-bitten Far Eastern region, Kataktchan tells a story deeply etched in the annals of wartime and post-Soviet history. Initially established during the throes of World War II, the town was birthed through the toil and sweat of prisoners who were put to work in its coal mines. These mines not only fueled the war effort, but also sustained a burgeoning community against the backdrop of harsh and unforgiving landscapes. For decades, Kataktchan thrived on coal extraction, its residents carving out a life amid the extremes. However, the dissolution of the Soviet Union marked the beginning of the end for this isolated settlement. Economic turmoil ensued, leading to the closure of one of its lifeblood coal mines in the early 1990s. The town's fate was sealed in 1996 when a tragic explosion wreaked havoc, causing irreparable damage and leading to a mass exodus. By 2010, Kataktchan had become a ghost town, its abandoned buildings and desolate streets standing as eerie testaments to its very turbulent past. Once home to over 10,000 souls, its population plummeted to 0, leaving behind only memories and the chilling silence of abandonment. Today, Kataktchan exists in a peculiar limbo, captivating the curious and the adventurous who venture to explore its ruins, a contrast to the vibrant life it once nurtured. Next up on our list today, we are heading over to Villa Epicuén in Argentina. Imagine strolling through a place that feels like a scene straight out of a post-apocalyptic movie. Well, welcome to Villa Epicuén in Argentina. This isn't just your average ghost town, it's got a backstory that could rival any thriller. A thriving lakeside resort town buzzing with tourists, laughter, and life, families soaking up the sun, kids splashing in the water, Villa Epicuén was the place to be, especially known for its therapeutic salty waters, much like the Dead Sea. But here's the twist, nature of course had its own plans. Over the decades, the lake began to swell, slowly nibbling away at the town's edges until, in the 1980s, it devoured the whole place, submerging everything under meters of water. The town disappeared, leaving only memories and submerged dreams. Fast forward a few decades and the scene shifts again. The waters recede, almost as mysteriously as they came, revealing the skeleton of Villa Epicuén. Today, it's an astonishing sight. Buildings, trees, and streets all laid bare, encrusted with salt and frozen in time. It's a little bit spooky, incredibly intriguing, and undeniably a one-of-a-kind destination that tells the tale of the relentless passage of time. Next up today, we have Plymouth in Montserrat, a place that once thrummed with life, its streets bustling with the daily hustle and bustle you'd expect from a capital city, and now it stands in stark contrast. A ghost town that is eerily silent, its buildings and streets swallowed by nature's fury. Back in the summer of 1995, the earth rumbled, and Montserrat's Soufriere Hills volcano awoke from its slumber, dramatically altering the town's fate. Ash clouds billowed into the sky and molten lava crept through the streets, prompting a mass exodus. By December, the once vibrant town was left deserted, its 4,000 residents seeking safety elsewhere. Though a few brave souls ventured back hoping to reclaim their lives, the volcano had other plans. In 1997, another fierce eruption forced even these resilient returnees to abandon their homes for good. Today, Plymouth is an uncanny testament to the power of nature, its buildings peeking out from the ashen landscape, a town frozen in time, with a population count that's dropped to an eerie 0. So while you can't really visit Plymouth for a casual stroll or a quick bite, its story continues to fascinate and to resonate. Next up, we are heading over to Tawergha in Libya. Oh, Tawergha. A place with a tale as haunting as a ghost story, but sadly, it's all too real. Imagine a town in Libya home to about 40,000 souls living their daily lives only for everything to change when the winds of the 2011 Libyan civil war blew through. This town wasn't just touched by conflict, it was transformed by it, earning the eerie title of Ghost Town. Schools, shops, homes, all abandoned, the laughter and chatter of life replaced by silence. Fast forward to 7 years post-conflict, and the image of Tawergha doesn't get much brighter. The residents were forced to flee, leaving behind their homes and their lives. They didn't go far, settling in a nearby town, but in a very different setup. Instead of houses, they lived in 250 tents. Despite the conflict and the loss, the spirit of the Tawergha community persisted, their resilience shining through despite the drastic change in their living conditions. Moving on down, we are heading over to Humberstone in Chile. Imagine stepping into Humberstone, a ghost town nestled in the parched Atacama Desert, which feels like wandering onto the set of an old Western film. Once this place was buzzing with around 3,500 folks, all mingling, working, and living their lives around the booming potassium nitrate, or saltpeter, industry. Saltpeter was the gold of its time, as it was a critical ingredient in gunpowder and fertilizers, fueling agriculture and warfare worldwide. From the late 1880s to 1930, this little town was like the Silicon Valley of saltpeter, shipping off heaps of this white gold to places near and far, and playing a crucial role in global economics and even in conflicts. Then, technology advanced. Synthetic alternatives to saltpeter emerged, and just like that, the demand plummeted. The town's heartbeat slowed until it stopped altogether mid-20th century, leaving behind a time capsule in the desert. Now declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Humberstone is now an eerie yet fascinating window into the past, showing how communities can rise and fall with the tides of industry and innovation. And finally, rounding out our list today, we have Texola, Oklahoma. Oh, Texola. It's like a postcard from another time sitting quaintly along the iconic Route 66. Now imagine a place where the echoes of the past are so palpable that you can almost hear the hustle and bustle of its heyday. That's Texola for you. Back in the day, 1930 to be exact, 581 souls called this town home. Fast forward to today and you'll find a drastically smaller, but nonetheless fascinating population of just 35. But why such a drastic drop? Well, Texola's story is intertwined with some major historical events. Cotton was king here until it wasn't, thanks to agricultural decline. Then came the 1-2 punch of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, which turned thriving communities into ghost towns across the plains. Despite these hardships, Texola has clung to life, its resilience embodied by landmarks such as the Magnolia Service Station and an adorably minuscule stone-walled jail.
Starting off our list today, we have Athens, Texas, home to Reverend Fuller, who it seems took a dark turn the day the circus rolled into town. It is said that on that day, a wagon carrying a cargo of monkeys tipped over and the animals escaped into the woods, where some were later captured by Reverend Fuller. Locals tell that Fuller kept the monkeys in a cage on a plot of land he owned called Fuller Park, where eventually he began using them for highly unethical experimentation. It was said for years he tortured the animals until they eventually died and were buried on the land. Later, when Fuller passed, he and his wife were buried in the park as well. Many locals who had heard the rumors of Fuller's heinous acts went out to explore the land, driven by curiosity. Many also recounted that while exploring the area, they had found a series of entrances to underground tunnels, all of which eventually met up underground, forming the shape of a pentagram. It has also been said that the road leading into the park and the park itself, where the monkeys along with Fuller and his wife are buried, is extremely haunted. Not by Fuller's ghost, but rather the ghost of the monkeys who had to endure the unforgiving nature of Fuller's torture under the guise of scientific exploration. Next, we have the tragedy of McCarthy, Alaska, an event that took place in 1983, in which a man named Hastings had planned to wipe out the entire population of the small town. About 8 months prior to the incident, Hastings had moved to the small mining town that had a population of just 22 people. On February 29th, Hastings went over to his friend Chris Richards' home and fired 2 projectiles at the man. One hit him just above his eye and the other in the neck. Richards was, however, able to escape after defending himself with a kitchen blade and ran to get help. After firing at Richards, Hastings went to the airstrip where most of the town had gathered, awaiting the weekly mail delivery. He hit 7 individuals with projectiles from a handheld weapon. 6 passed and 1 suffered severe injury. When Hastings was eventually apprehended 30 kilometers outside of the town, he admitted that he had planned on taking out the entire population but was ultimately unsuccessful. He had also wanted to hijack the mail plane so that he could fly to Glen Allen, where he would steal a truck and blow himself up along with the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline Pump Station. Hastings was sentenced to 634 years in prison for his crimes. Next on our list today, we have San Jeronimo de Juarez, Mexico, a town with a population of just 7,300, in which Oscar Flores took the lives of 12 individuals, including a member of his own family. The incident started in the man's home, where he ended the life of his nephew with a kitchen blade. When police arrived on the scene, Flores was able to escape after he beat one officer with a large rock and stole the weapon off another. Flores then used that weapon to continue his violent rampage, firing at random people throughout the town. Eventually, the townspeople turned on Flores and began chasing him. While trying to outrun them, Flores lost the weapon he had stolen and somehow also lost his clothes. He faced off against the townspeople naked, armed with only a large blade, but when police arrived at the scene, they were able to successfully apprehend Flores, who was badly injured in the process and died in hospital not long after. After his death, it was discovered that 7 years prior to his final violent spree, Flores, who had a long history of substance abuse, had taken the life of his brother-in-law, as well as 5 other individuals in Tijuana in the years prior. Next up, we have the 10-hour killing spree that took place in June of 2010 in the small villages of Cumbria in England. It all started early in the morning when 56-year-old taxi driver Derek Bird drove to his brother's home and fired 11 projectiles into his head using a handheld weapon. He then drove to the home of his family's tax agent, who he thought had been conspiring against him alongside his brother, and took the man's life in a similar fashion. After the incident, it seems as though Bird just snapped. He began driving through the villages and towns, targeting fellow cab drivers. 1 died and 3 were injured before the police caught wind. Somehow, however, Bird was able to avoid capture. He ditched the cops and continued driving to the next town, where again he began firing at random people, ending the lives of another 9 men and women and injuring another 7. Eventually, out of gas and out of ammo, missing his vehicle's front tire, Bird got out of his car and began walking into the woods. An hour later, police located his body, and it was determined that the man, unable to live with his actions or perhaps face the consequences, had taken his own life. Next up on our list today, we have the small town of Luxeuil, located in France and home to just 130 residents. In 1989, it was resident Christian Dornier who landed the town on this list after a mental break led him to a 2-hour killing spree in which he ended the lives of 14 individuals. While the reality of the incident was shocking, after the event took place, many of the locals admitted to having suspected such behavior was inevitable from Dornier. In fact, before the killings even took place, the town's council had suggested to Dornier's family that he should seek psychological help for his disposition. Unfortunately, the family did not listen to the council, and on July 12th, Dornier fired a handheld weapon at his sister and then opened fire on his mother and father. Dornier then got in his car, where he spent the next 2 hours driving around town, firing his weapon at anyone who crossed his path. He was eventually caught by police after sustaining an injury from an officer's weapon. Dornier did survive the arrest and went to trial, but he was never convicted for his crimes. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity. In 1991, Dornier was checked into a psychiatric hospital in France, where he remains to this day. Next up, we have the small town of Hungerford, England, population 5,000. On August 10th of 1984, yet another 2-hour killing spree occurred that caused the deaths of 17 individuals, including the assailant's family dog, and it also badly injured 15 more. The killing started around 12 p.m. when Michael Robert Ryan abducted a woman from a local park, took her to a secluded area, and fired 13 projectiles at her, ending her life. Michael then fled the scene and made his way back to his neighborhood. When he arrived at his home, he ended the life of the family dog with a projectile and then began loading up his car with handheld weapons. He tried to leave, but his car wouldn't start, so out of anger, he grabbed a can of gasoline, soaked the house, and set it on fire. He then began walking down the road, aiming at anyone he saw. When his mother arrived on the scene, she yelled out to her son, begging him to stop and asking why he was doing what he was doing. He took her life and then fled the area. He eventually took his own life in an empty building that had been surrounded by law enforcement after Michael had been spotted inside. The incident changed the history of England, as shortly after this took place, the country implemented much stricter weapons laws. Next on our list today, we have the unsolved mystery of the Bedford, Massachusetts highway killings. In March of 1988, in the small town, which now has a population of around 13,000, young women started to go missing. The disappearances went on for months, but no one could figure out why they were happening. It wasn't until July of that same year that some clarity began to take place, when the bodies of 9 out of the 11 missing women were discovered along the town's highway. It was revealed that the women who had lost their lives all had ties to illegal substance distribution as well as sex work. Authorities determined that foul play had led to the deaths, and a case was opened in the hopes of locating the remaining 2 missing women and apprehending the killer or killers involved in the deaths of the discovered 9. Unfortunately, neither were ever found, and to this day, the case remains an unsolved mystery that continues to baffle law enforcement and plague the small town of Bedford, Massachusetts. Next up, and starting off our top 3 today, we have the small town of Burke Canyon in Idaho. The town was founded in 1887 after rich deposits of silver and lead had been discovered in the area. The architecture of the town was strange, as it had to accommodate the fact that the town had been built inside an incredibly thin canyon, which at some points was only 300 feet wide, but they made it work. For a while at least, as just a few years after the town opened its doors, it became devastated by an avalanche, which was quickly followed up by a labor strike. A labor strike that ended in a standoff between the miners and the mine owners, during which a projectile accidentally set off a large amount of dynamite, which caused a mill to explode and ended the lives of 6 people. A few years later, disgruntled miners deliberately blew up another mill, claiming the lives of even more. The incidents were followed up by 2 massive natural fires, a major flood, and another large avalanche, causing the fall of Burke Canyon, which is known today as nothing much more than a ghost town with some odd buildings and a very violent past. Next up, we have Attica, New York. If the town sounds familiar, it might be because you are vaguely remembering stories you've heard about the town's prison with the same name, which of course is what landed the small town on today's list in the first place. The Attica Maximum Security Prison was home to many of the world's most infamous criminals, including American killer David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam, who was responsible for at least 8 deaths, after which he consumed the flesh of his victims, and Mark David Chapman, the man who killed Beatles legend John Lennon. In 1971, the inmates of the prison, which had been known for its inhumane treatment of the prisoners, took control in an effort to negotiate for better living conditions. The state responded with extreme force, leading to the deaths of at least 34 inmates and 9 hostages. Okay, this last town is Baltimore, Maryland, and while it's not small, what happened there is definitely shocking. Have you ever heard of Joe Menthe? Well, if you haven't, listen up, and if you're eating, put it down. Joe Menthe was an American serial killer who claimed to have been responsible for violating and ending the lives of 13 separate individuals. If right now you're wondering what he did with the bodies of the deceased, I will tell you, but I'm not happy about it. He made them into burgers and served those burgers to members of the public at his roadside open pit barbecue stand. He was arrested after he asked a friend to help him dispose of a body he had been hiding in a warehouse for over a month. The friend obviously reported him to the police, and Joe was convicted of 2 killings despite confessing to 13. However, research did later confirm 3 more of his victims. Joe was sentenced to life without parole, thank God, and eventually died in his cell on August 5th of 2017 at the age of 62. To start off our list today, we are going to take a deep dive into Dudleytown, Connecticut, also known as the town that never existed or the village of the damned. The town was settled in the 1740s and thrived for a while before falling victim to disease, crop failure, and mysterious unexplained death, which began taking place shortly after the Dudley family came to visit. Many villagers believed that the family had arrived with a curse brought from England to damn the residents of the town. So, shortly after the misfortune started, Dudleytown's abandonment began as many villagers fled for their lives in fear, which was a pretty good call, I guess, because it is said that those who stayed began to slowly descend into the realm of insanity, one by one, with many claiming to have witnessed strange creatures emerging from the forest surrounding the town. Those who enter that same forest today tell of a deafening silence that feels eerily thick and almost suffocating. Reports of aggressive animals along the town's hiking trails, desperate screams coming from the treetops, and the fact that many people and pets have mysteriously gone missing in the area over the years might be a few reasons why the town remains abandoned and illegal to enter to this day, which honestly just makes me wonder what other secrets might be hiding within its historically dark parameters.
Alright, next up we have La Noria in Chile. Now, when I describe this place, it's gonna sound like I'm exaggerating, but I'm really not. There are tons of videos of people exploring this ghost town, and it looks exactly what it sounds like when described. An incredibly creepy abandoned town with bones, some human, a lot human, scattered around the place. Open coffins, crosses everywhere. It's really quite the vibe. This place sits in the Atacama Desert. It was once a bustling mining town, but when the mines dried up, the people started new lives, but their dead were left behind. And as the years went on, people would come to this place and loot it. Even coffins would be opened up, and items like jewelry they'd been buried with would be stolen. So tons of graves now sit out in the open with the bones of the dead still sitting inside of them. So it probably comes as no surprise that people will claim to see some unexplained things going on here, especially at night. Shadowy figures, or even just full-bodied apparitions. And of course, the haunting sounds of the angered spirits are said to echo through the night as well.
Alrighty, next up we have an ancient town with some pretty sadistic sacrificial rituals. Well, not so much a town as a temple in a town, specifically the Moche Temple located in the northwest of Peru. The temple thrived between 100 and 800 AD. The people of the town were known for producing sophisticated goods for their time, including hand-painted pottery made from molds. They also were incredibly advanced when it came to goldworking, monument construction, and city planning. While at one time the town was well known for their advancements, including their incredibly efficient irrigation systems, in 1995 they became known for something a bit different. You see, archaeologists discovered a huge sacrificial gravesite near the temple filled with the bodies of male sacrificial victims who likely did not go willingly. As it is believed, many of them were travelers who met their unfortunate ends while crossing the Moche land in search of their final destinations. Murals on the walls of the temple illustrate the men's final moments, showing them naked and hogtied before being slaughtered, after which the men's skulls were turned into cups used to collect the BLOOD of the deceased so that it may be offered up as a gift to the gods. Super gross.
Next, we head over to China to discuss Kowloon Walled City. Unlike pretty much every spot on this list, I think this place would have actually been much scarier before it was abandoned. The Kowloon Walled City was this crazy, super dense, and sort of chaotic place in Hong Kong. Picture a bunch of cramped, towering buildings all squished together, a giant concrete jungle. Back in the Song Dynasty around 960 to 1279 AD, there was this cool walled garrison in Kowloon. Over time, it got kind of abandoned, and during the British colonial period, nobody really bothered about it. People just started building random structures within its walls. Fast forward to the 20th century, and it turned into this insane, unplanned mega city within a city. The buildings were like a tangled mess of staircases, pipes, and wires. It became famous for being overcrowded, and it was also basically lawless. The only ones really governing the place were the triads. It was tons of crime, and it was very dark. Because of how dense the place was, it was hard for natural light to even reach the lower levels of the city, so people had to go to the roofs of their buildings to get any light. Eventually, in the 90s, the Hong Kong government decided the place needed to go, and demolition began in March of 1993. Today, though, some of the ruins still remain.
Next up, we've got the Bhangar Fort, located in Rajasthan, India. The small town was built in the 17th century by an emperor named Madho Singh as a testament of love to his son, Man Singh. At its peak, the town was home to over 10,000 people. Today, living in the town is prohibited. And while tourists and locals may visit the ruins during the day, they are strictly banned from entering the area before sunrise and after sunset. And this is because of the fact that since Bhangar Fort's re-establishment as an unaltered landmark in the 21st century, people who have entered the premises during these times have often heard or seen dark spirits. And those who have gone into the forts have either turned up dead or just not turned up at all. Because of this, each night before the sun sets, the forts and the grounds are evacuated, locked, and guarded. This is also why the area has earned the title of most haunted place in India. Many believe the haunting is due to a curse placed on the town during its peak by hermit Baba Balu, who was living in the area at the time. Shortly after he declared his curse, a devastating earthquake hit the town, causing its people, along with the people from 83 surrounding villages, to vanish overnight.
Next on the list is Poveglia Island in Italy. This place has a rather ominous nickname, Ghost Island, and that's not just because nobody lives there. This island is basically a mix of a former hospital and a big giant graveyard. Back in the day, during the bubonic plague in the 1700s, which was a very fun time, they used Poveglia as a quarantine spot. It was the place you'd get dumped when you were really sick. And then later on, they built a mental hospital there. So it went from a plague quarantine spot, pretty dark already, to a place where even more horrible things happened because mental hospitals were never pleasant and the inmates were never treated well. The hospital eventually closed in the 60s, and the island's been abandoned ever since. So many people died on this island that half of the soil is apparently made up of their remains, which is just wild. Today, the island is completely off limits because for some reason, people need to be told not to go to a place like this.
Next up, we've got Caldara, yet another town in Rajasthan, India, with a pretty sordid past. It is said that around 300 years ago, Caldara was quite a prosperous village where townsfolk lived happily, and despite the area's dry agriculture, were able to grow incredibly abundant crops throughout the years. It wasn't until the arrival of a debaucherous prime minister, Salem Singh, that things started to go downhill. When Salem arrived in the town, he set his sights on a beautiful young woman. He claimed he would marry her by any means necessary, including force. He warned the villagers that any attempt to protect the girl and thwart the marriage would result in grave consequences for their lands. And so, the villagers basically said screw it. The entire population of the town, including the young woman that Salem had hoped to marry, left Caldara, but not before they put a dark curse on its barren lands, ensuring that Salem would never be able to reap the ill-earned rewards of what the villagers had sown. To this date, the small town of Caldara remains abandoned, in almost the same state it had been left in so many years ago, minus the fruitful harvests, of course. Those who have visited the ancient grounds have told of dark forces that they feel are determined to protect the uninhabitable status of the area, as per the villagers' curse, which had been designed so that no one would ever be able to settle in the area again.
Next on the list, we have the largest contaminated site in the southern hemisphere, Wittenoom, in Western Australia. This town was surrounded by asbestos mines. There were rich asbestos deposits in the surrounding hills, and back in the day, asbestos was in high demand, being used in construction as a fire resistant and for insulation. So the town grew pretty rapidly as miners and their families settled in the area. Whitnum was a bumping community. There were schools, shops, a movie theater, but as the years went on and concerns about the health risks associated with asbestos exposure began to be a thing, it became pretty obvious that people were living in a death trap. By the 60s and 70s, the health hazards of asbestos became a well-known thing and the demand for it really dried up. The Whitnum mine closed in 1966, which had pretty much been the sole source of income for the town, and on top of that, the negative health effects were starting to become pretty apparent. By the 2000s, the town had officially been shut down and only a handful of holdouts remained, but as of 2022, there's no one left, and in 2023, the place started getting demolished completely.
Okay, next on our list today we have Cinco Saltos, an Argentinian town with a pretty dark past, obviously. The area in which the town resides receives very little sunlight, providing it with a quite fittingly dark and gloomy aura year-round. On many occasions, Cinco Saltos has been referred to as the City of Witches, this being largely due to the fact that, historically, many residents of the area had been dedicated practitioners of black magic, namely necromancy and witchcraft. It is said that in ancient times, witches would often perform occult rituals in the town. One of the more commonly performed was a ritualistic sacrifice of young men and women on the Pellegrini Lake that ran through the center of the town. It is said that to this day, anyone who stands near the lake at night comes to know the disembodied screams of the many victims said to have lost their lives by the river so long ago.
All right, we're starting off the list with Inunaki Village. If you want a truly evil town, this is it. Inunaki is said to be this hidden village in a forest in Fukuoka Prefecture. There are only a small handful of residents in Inunaki, and they're not friendly. These are people who choose to go against the principles of Japanese culture. Anyone who's unfortunate enough to find themselves even just in the vicinity of Inunaki may be dragged in only to be met with the violent, sadistic people who live there. One story goes that in the early 70s, a couple's car broke down. They ventured further up the forest hoping to find help, but they came across a small empty town. It looked totally abandoned. Then out of one of the homes stepped this disheveled, crazy-eyed old man who told the couple they were in the village of Inunaki. Then he chopped them up with a sickle. So yes, Inunaki Village is an urban legend, but with every urban legend, there is a nugget of truth. And the legend of Inunaki Village really started with the old Inunaki Tunnel. This tunnel, built in 1949, has a history so dark that it's now completely sealed off. A number of violent crimes and deaths have happened at the tunnel, to the point where stories began to spread that there was this evil village beyond it. And even though it's all sealed off now, there are also plenty of stories of the place being very, very haunted.
Tucked away and forgotten by time, Igo Middlegate has quite the story to tell, straddling a line between a grim past and its very current eerie persona. A spot that once echoed with the despair of World War II concentration camps has now transformed into this intriguing, albeit slightly spooky, abandoned site. Located in a US Navy housing area campground in Zushi City, the middle gate to this campground is said to have been a Japanese ammunition depot, but also a place where prisoners of war were held and executed or worked to death. Guards of the middle gate have reported seeing legless Japanese soldiers in World War II era uniforms, as well as hearing the classic disembodied voices and footsteps. It's always the footsteps that get me. I don't like it. This history is certainly grim enough to make this place one that has countless tales of hauntings and ghostly visits, but the history of this area does not stop here. In fact, it is said that the area surrounding Ikigo also happens to be the resting place of around 50 yagura, or ancient burial tombs. The tombs were built into the sides of cliffs and date all the way back to the 16th and 17th centuries. Legend also has it that this area was a battlefield for groups of samurai in the 14th century, where many people lost their heads, alright? All in all, this makes a lot of sense why this place has countless terrifying stories surrounding it. A bunch of nearly headless nicks walking around. M'lady,
Next on the list we have Natchitoches, which is usually referred to as Natchitoches Ghost Town. And that's not just because it's completely abandoned either. Apparently you can still find some ghostly residents lingering around this place. Natchitoches was a tin mining town. The workers and their families had to live on site because it's a pretty good clip away from surrounding cities. At some time in the 80s though, everyone up and left, and it's not entirely known why. With most mining towns, there's always a possibility that the mines just dry up. Usually there's an economic factor, but whatever the reason was, the ghost town is said to be haunted. There's a doctor's office in the abandoned hospital that still has the remains of human organs. There's also a jar with a human brain that was there for a while, but someone stole that. Anyway, the place looks like it would be a pretty cool area to explore.
Let's take a jaunt into the eerie folds of Japan's past, right into the heart of Orian-buchi. Alright, I tried to look it up. It's not as easy to look up as you think it is, okay? So just politely let me know how to pronounce it in the comments if I got it wrong. Keyword being polite. This place isn't your average historical site. It's steeped in tales of sorrow and the supernatural. Here, the air is thick with the legend of courtesans whose lives took a tragic turn, leaving behind a legacy that's as somber as it is mysterious. The legends behind this place go back to the Warring States period. This was a period between the 15th and 16th century where there were almost constant civil wars and upheavals seen in Japan. During this time, this site had a gold mine. Of course, this meant that quite a few people were in the area because of this mine, and there were also courtesans who came here in order to give their services to the men working the mine. Unfortunately, in an attempt to keep the secret of the gold from getting out, it is said that those working the mines took the lives of the 55 courtesans in the area. Since this dark moment in history, there have been countless haunting tales from this area. It is said that the hauntings most often come at night, and people have expressed hearing mostly the screams and cries of the women who are said to haunt the area. So, are you up for a visit? This place sounds pretty horrifying. James, are you gonna go there?
Yeah, probably. Next on the list we have Yokai Village. This small village in the Tokushima prefecture has a history full of tales of yokai. If you don't know what yokai are, they're basically the demons and spirits of Japanese folklore. This village once had a good number of residents, about 15,000, but the story goes that villagers started having encounters with what they could only describe as yokai, and at some point in the 50s, a ton of people just packed their bags and started leaving town because there were demons about, which is understandable. This village was the birthplace of a lot of yokai legends, including the Konokai Jiji, which is a type of yokai resembling a short, old man who is constantly weeping. And when passersby try to comfort what looks like a small crying old man, it then latches onto them, and with the victim unable to break free from this small old man's grasp, because he's not an old man, he's a demon, the yokai then increases its weight until the poor person is just crushed to death. They've started embracing the spirits and demons said to reside there, and now hold yokai festivals and have put up tons of yokai statues. It looks like a really cool place.
Just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the tranquil sanctity of Nikko's Tashugo Shrine, there lies an altogether different realm. A ghostly echo of Americana right in the heart of Japan. Welcome to the Western Village, a theme park that once throbbed with the sounds of cowboy boots and saloon piano, inspired by the wild frontiers of classic westerns and the dystopian allure of Westworld. Imagine stepping into 1973, the year this very peculiar park sprang to life, a place where the Wild West met the Far East, brimming with gunslingers, saloons, and a replica of Mount Rushmore. But fast forward to 2007 and the tumbleweeds began to roll. The park closed its doors, leaving behind a tableau frozen in time, an eerie tableau that whispers tales of yesteryear to those who dare to visit. Today, the Western Village stands as a hauntingly beautiful paradox, a place where time seems to stand still amidst the decay. Urban explorers, those modern-day adventurers, flock here, drawn by the irresistible allure of its desolation and the uncanny presence of its robotic inhabitants.
And we're heading back to Tokushima Prefecture once again to discuss Nagoro. So this remote village has had a steadily declining population over the years. There were never a ton of residents, but more and more people started leaving to look for better employment opportunities. The old folks passed away. That's just what they do. And by 2019, the village that at one time had 300 plus people now only had about 27. So the place is basically a ghost town. But unlike other abandoned towns you'll come across, this one has become pretty well known for all the life-size dolls scattered throughout the streets and buildings. Tsukimi Ayano, a woman who had left the village when she was young and then came back about 20 years ago to care for her father, decided she wanted to make the place feel more lively. So she started creating all these dolls, and today there are over 350 dolls placed throughout the village. Definitely gives the place a strange vibe. On one hand, there's this tranquil beauty to it, just quiet and pleasant, but on the other hand, there is an underlying sadness about it, kind of like in I Am Legend, where Will Smith puts up a bunch of mannequins and he starts yelling at them because they won't respond to him. That is a sad scene.
What about the Osarizawa mine? Tucked away in the verdant depths of the Akita prefecture lies this ghostly vestige of industrial ambition. Once a thriving hub of copper extraction, this mine's veins pulsed with the lifeblood of progress until the mid-20th century. Yet, all mines have their final days, and for Osarizawa, the echoes of activity have long since faded into an eerie silence. Now, imagine wandering through the abandoned town that once buzzed with the hopes and hard work of its inhabitants. Streets where laughter and chatter once filled the air are now corridors of quiet, bordered by the crumbling relics of homes and communal spaces. There's the desolate school, standing forlorn, its empty classrooms whispering tales of generations who learned and played within its walls, now surrendered to the relentless march of nature. But it's not just about what's gone, it's about what's left behind. The mine and its ghost town are shrouded in mystery that tugs at the curious and the brave. What stories are etched into the fading walls? What secrets do these silent shafts hold?
Next on the list is Nara Dreamland. Now, unfortunately, this place has now been demolished, but for a long time it sat completely abandoned, and urban explorers would share some rather creepy stories about the place, but I'll get to that in a minute. So Nara Dreamland was a theme park in Nara, the capital city of Nara Prefecture. It opened in 1961 and was around for years before finally closing in 2006. It couldn't afford to stay open because of low attendance. The place was huge, pretty much the size of a small village, and it just sat there out of use for like 10 years. There's something I find so especially eerie and sad about abandoned theme parks. I mean, these are places that are literally built to be filled with people. Everything is made to be an overload to the senses. Larger-than-life cartoony statues are all over the place. The signs are all vibrant and colorful. You're supposed to walk through a theme park hearing laughter and screaming and the sounds of large rides zipping along the tracks. So, when these places are empty and worn down, left for nature to slowly creep in and reclaim them, it's just the polar opposite of what the place was originally intended for, and I think that just unsettles us. And it doesn't help that urban explorers would claim to hear strange sounds near the park's boats or see strange shadowy figures poking out of corners.
Dive with me into the eerie silence of Yodo Harbor, where whispers of the past mingle with the murmurs of rebuilding. A once thriving port bustling with life, suddenly silenced by nature's wrath in 2011. The Tohoku earthquake and tsunami didn't just shake the ground, they shook the very soul of this place, leaving behind a ghost town where echoes of lost lives linger in the air. Now, when you stroll through Yodo Harbor, you're walking a tightrope between two worlds, the tangible buzz of reconstruction and the shadowy quiet of areas frozen in time. These neglected corners, untouched and forsaken, aren't just empty. They're charged with the stories of what was. It's as if the town itself is caught in a haunting limbo, struggling to whisper its secrets to those who dare to listen. So, if you're drawn to places where history and and mystery intertwine, where every stone and silent building might hold a hidden narrative, then Yodo Harbor beckons. It's a testament to the unpredictable nature of creation and destruction, and a haunting reminder that even in our absence, stories endure, waiting to be unearthed.
Next up, we have La Noria in Chile. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this place was a buzzing salt pepper mining town filled with life and industry. But as time went on, the demand for salt pepper declined, and by the mid-20th century, La Noria was left abandoned. Now, when you visit La Noria, you'll find it frozen in time. The town's buildings have decayed though, but what makes this ghost town especially creepy is all the bones. More on that in a minute. Walking through the deserted streets, you can't escape the feeling of stepping back in time when La Noria was a thriving hub of activity. The place is also very isolated. It's in the middle of the desert, so that definitely adds another layer of spookiness to the place. But as stated before, one of the most haunting aspects of this place is the old cemetery and all the damn human bones. Here you'll find open coffins, some still housing human remains. Over the years, the ghost town was looted, so bones are scattered everywhere, pretty unsettling. It's said that you should never wander to this town at night, as the tortured souls of the dead arise from their graves and wander about. Number 5, Mount Sinabung, Indonesia. Mount Sinabung in Indonesia. This is something that is still ongoing. It's a series of volcanic eruptions that have led to the evacuation of villages in the surrounding area of the volcano. Mount Sinabung, located in North Sumatra, has been active for centuries, but in recent years it's become particularly volatile, and the eruptions have posed a significant threat to the communities living in the vicinity of it. When Sinabung starts to rumble and spew ash and lava, local authorities kick into action. They closely monitor the volcano's activity and issue evacuation orders when necessary to ensure the safety of the residents, and these orders are not taken lightly, as volcanic eruptions can be unpredictable and of course deadly. The process of evacuating towns and villages near the volcano is pretty challenging. Families leave their homes behind, their possessions, and sometimes even their livelihoods. Temporary shelters are set up to provide a safe haven for those displaced by the eruptions, and these shelters offer basic necessities like food and water, medical assistance, but the evacuations are not only a physical upheaval, but also an emotional one. As you can imagine, families are forced to leave behind their ancestral lands and the life they've known for generations. At our number 3 spot, let me take you to Ruby, Arizona. It's a real gem in the desert. Wish I could say that pun was not intended, but it was. Back in the early 20th century, this place was buzzing with life, all thanks to the copper mining boom. It was a kind of town where everybody knew everybody, and things were looking pretty good. But as they say, what goes up must come down, and the copper boom fizzled out, and by the mid-1900s, Ruby was nothing more than a ghost town. The folks moved on, and what they left behind is a piece of history stuck in time. Those that wander around Ruby today feel like they're stepping into a time capsule. There are houses, a school, a general store, all just sitting there as if the residents were there one second and gone the very next. A slice of life from another era preserved in the desert. What makes Ruby even cooler is its remote location. You're out there in the rugged desert and you can't help but feel a sense of isolation. As you can imagine, I've never been. That's probably why it's a magnet though for history buffs and folks who love exploring the past.
Starting off our list today, we have the small town of Fairfax, Virginia, with a population of 24,000 people and one bunny man. No, I'm not talking about some strange, unethical scientific experiment that broke the laws of both nature and the law and created some kind of bunny-human hybrid situation. What I'm actually talking about is just a bit more grounded in reality. You see, what happened was, in the early 1900s, an asylum in the town shut down after local residents caused an uproar over the amount of patients housed at the asylum, as well as its close proximity to their homes. The asylum complied with the wishes of the public by shutting its doors and sending its patients to live out the rest of their days elsewhere, more specifically Lorton prison. On their way out of town, however, the bus carrying the now prisoners swerved and crashed by Fairfax Bridge, and the then patients, now inmates, escaped. All were eventually located except one, a patient named Douglas Griffin. And soon after the crash, police began finding skinned, half-eaten rabbits hung up along the bridge. It is also said that one night a group of young people went out to explore the area and ended up meeting the same fate as the bunnies. Douglas was never found, and in 1970, almost 60 years after the bus crash, many people reported seeing a man in a white suit with bunny ears carrying a very sharp blade. Was it Douglas? A hoax? Or 60 years later, was it some kind of copycat killer?
Next up, we have Quitman, Arkansas. Apparently, y'all got a dog boy you gotta deal with out there. The story begins with a home built in 1890. A few different families lived there before the Bettises moved in. They were a family of three: Floyd and Aileen Bettis and their son Gerald. Gerald was an absolute terror, especially to animals. Stories began to circulate about Gerald roaming the streets, gathering up stray cats and dogs, which he'd then torment to death. And he grew up to treat his own parents just as badly, keeping them locked away in the attic and even throwing his own father down the stairs at one point, killing him instantly. Gerald was arrested and died in jail, but that's not where his ghost is said to be. Families that have moved into the home since have reported strange things happening inside. First of all, it's said that pets just outright refuse to go into this house. Then there's the story of a contractor who came to work on the house and saw a large man with long brown hair carrying a cat by its neck, who then began rushing towards the contractor before vanishing into thin air. Many believe the home to be haunted by Gerald Bettis, aka the Dog Boy.
Next, we are headed on up to Gary, Indiana, also known as a serial killer's playground. Once a thriving steel town known as the Magic City, Gary kind of fell off after the local industry began to decline in the 1990s due to competition overseas. Eventually, it turned into somewhat of a ghost town with over 10,000 abandoned and decaying houses far beyond repair lining its empty streets. As is with most abandoned places, the town quickly became a hotspot for arsonists, vandals, cult gatherings, and even a serial killer by the name of Darren Van. Between 2013 and 2014, Darren ended the lives of 7 different women by forcibly restricting their airways, and 6 of these women he hid throughout various abandoned homes in the town. The bodies remained hidden and his crimes remained undetected until police found his final victim lifeless in a motel bathroom. To avoid the death penalty, Van made a deal. Instead of pleading guilty to the one killing, the only killing police had evidence to charge him for, he would plead guilty to 7 and bring the police to the homes in which the bodies were stashed to prove that he did in fact commit those crimes. He was instead charged with 7 concurrent life sentences without parole.
Next on the list is Ojai, California, and the tale of the Charman. Just south of Ojai lies Camp Comfort County Park, which is full of urban legends and ghost stories, like tons. There's the ghost of a horsewoman, a headless motorcyclist, there's a vampire skeleton confined in a stone coffin. The list just goes on and on. There's stuff happening at this place. But one of the creepiest urban legends is the one they call Charman. So in 1948, there was a huge fire in the home of a father and his son. They were both horribly burnt before firemen arrived, and it took them a while to get there apparently, because by the time they did get there, the father was dead and the son had become completely deranged. He'd hung his father by his feet and skinned him. And the story goes that he just went crazy and then decided to do that. He was like, "Oh, I'm burnt! I gotta hang my father up and eat his skin." I don't know why that was how it goes, but that's apparently how the story goes. He became then this charred, deranged monster and ran off into the woods and started living like Jason Voorhees. He'd come out and attack unsuspecting people. Charman is said to emit a horrible burning smell and only wears bandages over his burnt, peeling skin. Some say he's a ghost. Others say he survived for a while, living on his own in the woods as a deranged psycho, coming out of hiding on occasion to terrorize people.
From the Golden to the Lone Star State, it's time to talk about the Candy Lady who resided in a small Texas town in the early 20th century. While having a Candy Lady in your area might sound like a pretty sweet deal. It really was the complete opposite for those living in this particular town. In fact, the Candy Lady is a story that apparently haunts people of Texas to this day. So who the hell is she? Well, she was a woman with a very sinister NO. It is said that this woman would leave candy on her windowsills each night in an effort to lure young people over to her home. When they got close, she would snatch them up. During this time, many young members of the town were reported missing, and one farmer reported having found rotten teeth strewn along his fields. That is so gross. A sheriff had also been found with his eyes clawed out and his pockets stuffed with candy, and soon after, a young boy was found in a very similar state. If this doesn't tell you not to take candy from strangers, I really don't know what does. I can't help you then.
Now we move on to Ellicott City in Maryland. This town has a very unsettling urban legend, that of the Blink Man of Ilchester Tunnel, also known as the Flickergeist. Ilchester Tunnel is said to be haunted by the vengeful spirit of a homeless man who was hit by an oncoming train in the 1900s. Now, if you feel like it, you can summon Blink Man to haunt you rather easily. All you need to do is head to the tunnel at midnight. Of course, it's always midnight, and stare into it for a whole hour. When 1 a.m. hits, it's said that you'll start to see the ghostly, tormented face of the Blink Man, and then every time you blink from that moment on, you'll see him creeping closer and closer to you when your eyes are closed. Now, personally, I wouldn't suggest doing this, even without the possibility of being haunted by a disgruntled homeless ghost the rest of your life. Just don't think it's a great idea to stand staring off into a tunnel in the middle of the night on active train tracks.
Moving on up and over to Exeter, Rhode Island, home to many of history's New England witches, the first of which was executed in 1647. Fast forward to 1982, let's talk about the pure evil that is the final days of a young woman named Mercy Brown. Was she a witch, or was she just educated? Or was she actually a vampire? Well, here's the thing. In her life, Mercy had watched both her mother and sister pass from tuberculosis, the same disease that Mary suffered from leading up to her final day. Due to all the deaths surrounding Mary and the Brown family, the small town of Exeter began to believe that she might have been a witch, or worse still, a vampire. Why? No clue. What did they do about it? Well, after her burial, they dug her up and burned her heart and her liver to ashes, and then they force-fed those ashes to her surviving brother, who died just 2 months later. If that's not dark enough, it is said that Mercy Brown's ghost still haunts the cemetery in which her decimated grave resides.
Next on the list is Tagus, North Dakota. Now, Tagus has long been abandoned. It's a ghost town that once thrived in the 1900s. There's not a whole lot left of it now, just a handful of rundown homes, and of course a stairway to hell. At one time, there was a Lutheran church in the ghost town. It was burnt down in the early 2000s by hoodlums. The abandoned church was always said to be a real spooky place. Satan worshippers were said to practice dark rituals there. It's said if you stand in the exact spot where the church once stood, you can faintly hear screams coming from the souls that were once damned to hell. Other sights to see at the abandoned town of Tagus include, but are not limited to, a ghost train, which some have seen chugging along the old abandoned train tracks. Love the idea of a ghost train. Ghostly hellhounds, regular old ghosts, and ticked off local residents who may not be too pleased with mass amounts of people descending on the ghost town to catch a glimpse of the paranormal.
From the stairway to hell in North Dakota to the gates of hell in Thornton, Colorado. What's next? Highway to Hell in AC/DC? Anyways, the gates are said to be located just off of Riverdale Road, a relatively short road in Thornton. But you know what they say, short road, big scary mansion containing the gateway to hell. The mansion is said to have gained its entryway status after a man buried his wife, son, and daughters alive on the property. But these were not the first deaths to occur on the lot. In previous years, many people had been killed and strung up around the mansion as well. We are not sure if the madman responsible for all of these deaths was outright trying to summon the devil, but it appears that when you do that much evil in such a short amount of time, it just kind of happens. Along with the decrepit old mansion's gateway status, the ghost man's wife is said to haunt the property as well, along with a pack of ghost dogs. Many people who have attempted to visit the mansion have reported hearing whispers and screams, experiencing car trouble, feeling a chill, and seeing phantom vehicles and disappearing men on the road. Pretty creepy. I would not recommend going there.
We're rounding out the list with the town of Cumberland. So this small town in Rhode Island has an urban legend that may have been part of the inspiration for Freddy Krueger in A Nightmare on Elm Street. So campers at Camp Currana, couldn't figure out how to pronounce that. All you Camp Currana campers, let me know in the comments. But people at this camp have told stories for decades, apparently going all the way back to the early 20th century. So the tale of Fingernail Freddy. Freddy was a farmer who lived in a small log cabin with his wife and children. He was a quiet man who kept mostly to himself, but little hoodlums were always running around on his land and messing with his crops. Well, one day Freddy he had enough. He decided he was going to scare these menaces off his property once and for all by filling a shotgun with rock salt and firing at them. This did scare them off, but not for good. When Freddy was out in town, the young vandals returned and burned his house down, with Freddy's family still inside. Freddy returned to find his cabin engulfed in flames and tried to rush in to save his loved ones, getting severely burned in the process. So Freddy ran off into the woods, living a secluded life, but every once in a while he'd come out to terrorize young boys at Camp Currana, a disfigured monster with a burnt face and incredibly long nails.
Up first on the list, we have Demon's Alley, a mysterious ghost town in New Jersey. The alley is made up of a handful of abandoned houses located off Route 23 in West Milford. Although there is no official record as to why the homes, which have been around since before anyone can remember, were abandoned in the first place, there are many theories that have speculated the cause. The most popular of which tells the story of a seemingly regular man who moved into the neighborhood, after which strange things began to happen. It appears as though this normal man was actually the leader of a large, very sinister cult. A fact which of course was unbeknownst to his neighbors, who upon receiving an invitation to the man's home happily obliged. It is said that once all of the members of the neighborhood had finally arrived, they were trapped inside to endure nothing short of a horrific tragedy, as members of the man's cult emerged from the shadows and massacred every last one. Our next town is the infamous Roanoke, and unlike Demon Alley, whose residents disappeared without a trace, the story of Roanoke is just slightly more bizarre, as an entire colony, including all of their homes and belongings, are said to disappeared. If you're a horror buff, you might recognize the name from season 6 of American Horror Story, which depicts the town in all its dark and gory glory, but again, that's a TV show, so let's get down to the facts. Roanoke, also known as the town that never was located in what's now known as Dare County in North Carolina. There is much more mystery than information surrounding the disappearance, but it is said that John White, an English artist, discovered the town around 1585, after which he returned back to England. In 1590, however, he made his way back to Roanoke to visit the locals whom he'd befriended on his first voyage, but was absolutely shocked when, upon his arrival, he found the town completely abandoned. Even the houses had disappeared, and in their place, a barrier fort was placed. And one word, Croatoan, was carved into a wooden post. Next up, we have Pine Point, located in the Northwest Territories in Canada. The small lead and zinc mining town that completely vanished in the 1980s, just 25 years after it was originally established in the 1960s. The town came to be as a result of a joint venture between the Government of Canada and the Cominco Mining Company, and was fully equipped with schools and small town businesses. When the Cominco mine officially shut its doors in 1988, the town's erasure began. As buildings were knocked down, residents quickly evacuated until there was nothing left more than the shell of a thing that once was. Now, I can understand Cominco deciding to end its involvement in the town. Perhaps the mines ran out of their precious lead or zinc. Perhaps the mines ran out of their precious lead or zinc that had led to the town's creation in the first place. But to begin knocking down buildings and pushing the town into a void of non-existence? Call me a cynic, but I think there's something more to it. Alright, for this next one, we might be veering slightly off the rails, but bear with me as we discuss the United Kingdom of Torrid. Was it a town that vanished? One that never existed at all? Or perhaps maybe one that did exist or does exist, but in a universe entirely separate separate from our own. The story begins in July of 1954 in a Japanese airport when a real man by the name of John Allen Kucher Zergus presented a passport in which the agent at the desk had never seen before. In fact, no one had ever seen it before, as the passport had been issued by the United Kingdom of Torrid, which as far as we know doesn't exist. You're probably thinking he was thrown out of the airport and never made his flight, but the strange part is that he had actually just gotten off a flight, his passport having been stamped and checked multiple times before boarding. So what was going on? When questioned, the man insisted that the United Kingdom of Torrid was in fact a real place and demanded someone bring him a map so he could provide some much needed education to the agents. Upon seeing the map, however, he became angry. He pointed to an area on the border between France and Madrid and asked why they would have provided him with a fake map. Police decided it would be best to question the man, and so they put him up in a hotel for the night with the hopes of doing so the next day, his room guarded by 2 officers. However, the next morning the room was completely empty. The man had vanished along with his passport and any trace of the unknown country. Some people believe this story, the presence of the man and the existence of a legitimate passport issued by what appeared to be a legitimate government, is proof of a parallel universe, but what do you guys think? Share it in the comments and I'll take a look. And next on the list we have Villa Epicuan in Argentina, a small village on a lake just 6 hours away from the capital, Buenos Aires. The town was created in 1920 when an Englishman saw the land and decided to lease it with the hopes of converting it into a tourist hotspot. He built a resort and paid local scientists to back his claims that the town's lake had healing properties, and all of a sudden, business was booming. Argentinian natives flocked to the area for a chance to experience the waters, along with many Jewish tourists who had found interest in the lake's uncanny similarity to the Dead Sea. While you might be thinking visitors to the town were unfortunate victims of a tourist trap, the mineral-rich lake really did have restorative properties and helped many people with arthritis, skin conditions, and even diabetes. The good fortune did eventually come to an end, however, when in 1985 it started to rain, and rain, and rain some more. So much so that water levels began to rise at a rate of 1 centimeter per hour. And by the end of it all, after 2 weeks of heavy rainfall and a broken dam, the water was 3 meters deep and the town was evacuated. It seems that all the water had given, it had also swiftly taken away. The town remained empty even after the water levels subsided many years later, except for Pablo Novak, age 39, who was born in the town and who remains to this day living in solitude in the ghost of a town that once was. Next on the list we have Varosha Famagusta on the island of Cyprus. Once a booming tourist town, the area is now nothing more than memories and ruins. In the late 1960s, the town had an estimated population of 60,000 individuals, a number which rose significantly in the high season to 100,000 people staying in the town. So, what happened to it? Well, in 1974, Turkey invaded the island country, causing citywide evacuations. The town was left abandoned and frozen in time, as occupants of the area had to flee quickly, leaving behind all of their belongings as if they had just run out to the store, expecting to be back home in no less than 20 minutes. After the attack, however, the town was fenced off from the rest of the island and no one was allowed to return, not even to retrieve items left behind. Because of this, the town still stands today, deserted and eerie, a snapshot in time, untouched for over 50 years. And next we have Hashima, Japan, also known as Battleship Island. So not just a town, but an entire island that became nothing more than a ghost town. The island was discovered about 9 miles, 15 kilometers away from the city of Nagasaki. And in 1810, coal was discovered there, an incredibly valuable resource at the time. In 1887, the island was converted into a mining facility inhabited by over 5,000 individuals, but that didn't last long, as in 1974, petroleum was becoming the preferred power product, and so with coal becoming assumingly obsolete, the mining facility was shut down. Because the mine was the island's only source of infrastructure, its foreclosure led to the departure of the entirety of the town's inhabitants. Today, the island, with its gray buildings and concrete moat, stands abandoned in the sea, closely resembling some kind of island battleship hybrid, hence its fitting nickname, Battleship Island. And finally, because I appreciate you all so much, we've got a 3-for-1. The disappearance of Louisiana towns Ruddock, Wangram, and Frenier in 1915. The trio, located on the southwest edge of Lake Pontchartrain, were major hotspots of immigration for German cabbage farmers, if you can believe it. The towns met their end on September 19th when a massive hurricane moved in from the Caribbean with surges of 13 feet and 125-mile-per-hour winds. On that day, the towns were completely washed away and over 300 lives were lost. While this is tragic, it's also scientifically explainable. But what isn't is the way that the storm and the many fatalities had been foretold. Records of the town, corresponding with records of voodoo priestesses, recall a woman by the name of Julia Brown, who served as a local healer. She was also quite the entertainer, spending her evenings sitting on her front porch, playing her guitar and singing made-up songs. But as she neared the end of her life, things began to take a sinister turn. Songs which once illustrated beauty and joy had been replaced by a tune of warning, as the woman sang that one day she would die and everything would die with her. Eventually, Julia did pass, and her funeral was held on October 2nd of 1915, the very day the storm rolled into town.